September 13, 1996, 4:03 p.m. University Medical Center, Las Vegas. Afeni Shakur stands beside her son's hospital bed and makes the decision no mother should ever have to make. She tells the doctors to turn off the machines, to stop the interventions, to let Tupac go. He's been fighting for 6 days. 6 days of surgeries and complications and brief moments of hope, followed by crushing setbacks. And Afeni has been there for all of it, sleeping in a chair, refusing to leave, talking to him, even though he can't respond, telling him it's okay, that he fought hard enough, that she's proud of him, that he can rest now. And when the machines are turned off and his breathing slows and stops, Afeni holds his hand and watches the son she raised, the son she fought for, protected, and shaped into a voice that changed the world, take his last breath. She's 49 years old, and the boy she carried in her womb while on trial for conspiracy to bomb public buildings. The boy she named after a revolutionary. The boy who became a poet, a rapper, an icon, and a target. That boy is gone, and Afeni is left with a grief so vast it will define the rest of her life. This is the story of Afeni Shakur, the Black Panther who raised a revolutionary, the mother who defended herself in court while pregnant, the woman who battled addiction and poverty, and the FBI's surveillance to give her son a chance, and the heartbreak of watching him become exactly what she raised him to be, and losing him because of it. If you're here because you want to understand where Tupac came from, not just the artist but the man, subscribe. We're telling the stories about the people who shaped him, the mother who gave him fire, the struggle that made him a fighter. Hit that like button and let's honor the woman behind the legend. Afeni Shakur was born Alice Faye Williams in 1947 in Lumberton, North Carolina. She grew up poor, black, Southern, in an America that told her she didn't matter, that her life was disposable, that the best she could hope for was to survive quietly and not make trouble. But Afeni wasn't built for quiet. By the time she was 20, she'd moved to New York City and joined the Black Panther Party, a revolutionary organization fighting for black liberation, community programs, and an end to police brutality. The Panthers weren't peaceful protesters. They were armed, organized, willing to defend their communities by any means necessary, and the US government saw them as a threat. The FBI's COINTELPRO program infiltrated the Panthers, arrested leaders on fabricated charges, and worked systematically to destroy the movement. In 1969, Afeni was one of 21 Panthers arrested in New York and charged with conspiracy to bomb police stations, department stores, and public buildings. The charges were serious. If convicted, she faced life in prison, and she was pregnant. That's the context Tupac was born into. His mother was in jail, on trial, facing a future where she might never hold him outside of a prison visiting room. And she was alone. Tupac's father, or the men Afeni believed might be his father, weren't part of the picture. She had no money, no legal team she could afford, just herself, and a belief that she hadn't done what they accused her of. So Afeni did something extraordinary. She defended herself in court, while pregnant, against a team of prosecutors backed by the full resources of the state, and she won. On May 13, 1971, the jury acquitted her and the other defendants of all charges. 1 month later, on June 16, 1971, Afeni gave birth to Lesane Parish Crooks. She later renamed him Tupac Amaru Shakur, after an 18th century Peruvian revolutionary who fought against Spanish colonizers and was executed for it. The name wasn't an accident, it was a prophecy, a declaration. This child would be a fighter, a voice for the oppressed, a revolutionary, and Afeni would make sure of it. What most people don't understand about Afeni is that she didn't just survive the trial, she became a symbol, the pregnant Black Panther who stood up to the system and won. The woman who proved that even when the government uses every tool at its disposal to break you, you can fight back and survive. But survival came with a cost. After the trial, the Black Panther Party collapsed. Internal conflicts, FBI infiltration, leaders killed or imprisoned, and Afeni was left trying to raise a child in the wreckage of a movement. She struggled with addiction, with poverty, with the trauma of everything she'd been through, and Tupac grew up watching his mother fight battles she couldn't always win. He saw her at her strongest, brilliant, fierce, unapologetic, and he saw her at her lowest, strung out, broke, unable to protect him from the chaos. And both versions shaped him, made him the artist who could rap about revolution and pain in the same breath, who understood that strength and vulnerability weren't opposites, that you could be a warrior and still be broken, that survival wasn't always beautiful, but it was always worth fighting for. Afeni moved constantly: New York, Baltimore, California, chasing jobs, chasing stability, trying to outrun the FBI surveillance that followed her everywhere. And Tupac learned early that home wasn't a place, it was wherever his mother was, and sometimes his mother was in pain. She later admitted in interviews that her addiction made her an inconsistent parent, that there were times when Tupac had to fend for himself, when he was hungry and she couldn't provide, when he had to grow up faster than any child should. But she also gave him something invaluable: a political education. She taught him about the Panthers, about systemic racism, about why the government feared black people organizing, about revolution, not as an abstract concept, but as something you live, something you fight for every single day. And Tupac absorbed it all. By the time he was a teenager, he could quote Malcolm X and Afeni Shakur and speak about oppression with a clarity that startled adults. Afeni didn't raise a rapper, she raised a revolutionary who happened to use rap as his weapon. How do you raise a child to fight a system designed to destroy him? And how do you live with yourself when that fight costs him his life? By the time Tupac was a teenager in the late 1980s, Afeni was deep in her addiction: crack cocaine, the drug that devastated black communities in the 80s and 90s, the drug that the government later admitted was funneled into those communities as part of a strategy to destabilize political movements. Afeni knew this, knew she was a casualty of the same system she'd fought against, but knowing didn't make it easier to stop. And Tupac watched his mother, the woman who'd stood up to prosecutors and won, who'd taught him to be fearless, lose herself to a substance she couldn't control. It broke something in him. He later wrote about it in songs like Dear Mama, the love and the pain existing side by side. The recognition that his mother was both his hero and his deepest wound, that he owed her everything and resented her for not being able to protect him. That complexity, the refusal to make her a villain or a saint, became one of Tupac's greatest strengths as an artist. He saw people fully, in all their contradictions, and he refused to simplify them. In 1988, Tupac moved to California. Afeni followed. She was trying to get clean, trying to rebuild, and Tupac was trying to make it as a rapper, to turn the anger and the pain and the political education Afeni had given him into something that could change lives. And slowly, it started working. He joined Digital Underground as a backup dancer, then started getting solo deals. By 1991, his debut album Tupacalypse Now was out, and the world started paying attention, not just to his talent, but to his message: the rage against police brutality, the empathy for single mothers and struggling families, the refusal to apologize for being black and angry and unapologetic. That was Afeni's son, the revolutionary she'd raised. And she was proud, but she was also terrified, because she knew what happened to black revolutionaries in America. They got silenced, imprisoned, killed, and Tupac was becoming a target. In 1993, Afeni got clean, for real this time. She later said it was Tupac's success that saved her, that watching him become the man she'd always known he could be, the voice she'd raised him to be, gave her a reason to fight for herself. She checked into rehab, did the work, and when she came out, she was sober, present, the mother Tupac had needed his whole life. And for a brief window, 1993 to 1996, they had something they'd never really had before: stability. Tupac was famous, making money, and he used some of that money to take care of Afeni, bought her a house, made sure she was secure, and Afeni for the first time in years could breathe, could watch her son without the fog of addiction, could be the mother she'd always wanted to be. But that window was short, because by 1994, Tupac was in trouble. Legal battles, the Quad Studios shooting, prison, and Afeni watched her son spiral into the same kind of chaos she'd spent her life fighting against, and she couldn't stop it, because Tupac was an adult now, making his own choices, and all she could do was love him and hope he'd survive. When Tupac went to prison in 1995 on a sexual assault conviction he maintained was unjust, Afeni was devastated, not just because her son was locked up, but because she saw the pattern. The system that had tried to destroy her in 1969 was now trying to destroy him, and she didn't know how to save him. She visited him in Clinton Correctional Facility, brought him books, talked to him about staying strong, about not letting them break him, and Tupac listened. But he was also changing, getting harder, angrier, and when Suge Knight posted $1.4 million bail to free him in exchange for signing with Death Row Records, Afeni had a bad feeling. She knew what Death Row was: the violence, the chaos, the way Suge used artists until they burned out or broke. And she told Tupac not to sign, to wait, to find another way. But Tupac was desperate. He'd been in prison for months. He needed out, and he signed. And that decision, made out of desperation and hope, and a belief that maybe he could control the situation, set everything else in motion. Sometimes the choices that save you in the short term destroy you in the long term, and mothers see it coming, but they can't always stop it. From 1995 to 1996, Afeni watched her son become someone she didn't fully recognize. Tupac post-death row was different, harder, more reckless. The political message was still there. Songs like Changes proved that. But so was the violence, the beef with Biggie and Bad Boy, the diss tracks, the public feuds, the sense that Tupac was playing a role he couldn't step out of. Afeni tried to reach him. She'd call, she'd visit, she'd remind him who he was. But Tupac was caught in something bigger than himself: the East Coast-West Coast war, the media frenzy, the label politics, the streets. And he was exhausted. People close to him said he talked about retiring, about getting out, about starting over. But he didn't know how, and Afeni didn't know how to help him. She was sober, present, but powerless, because you can't save someone who doesn't know how to save themselves. On September 7th, 1996, Afeni wasn't in Las Vegas. Tupac had gone to see the Mike Tyson fight. She stayed in California, and when the phone rang late that night, she knew before she answered. The voice on the other end was panicked. Tupac had been shot. He was in surgery. She needed to get to Las Vegas immediately. Afeni got on a plane, and for the entire flight, she prayed. Not the kind of prayer you say in church, but the desperate bargaining kind. Please, not my son. Take me instead. Just don't take him. But by the time she arrived at University Medical Center, the doctors had already told her the truth. Tupac's injuries were catastrophic. They'd done everything they could, but his body was shutting down, and the next few days would determine whether he lived or died. Afeni spent 6 days in that hospital, sleeping in a chair outside Tupac's ICU room, controlling who could visit, talking to doctors, making decisions, and sitting beside her son's bed, holding his hand, talking to him even though he couldn't respond. She told him she loved him, that she was proud of him, that he'd done more in 25 years than most people do in a lifetime. And she apologized for the times she wasn't there, for the addiction, for not being able to protect him from the world, for raising him to be a fighter and then watching him fight battles he couldn't win. And on September 13, when the doctors told her there was no more hope, that Tupac's organs were failing and he was in pain, Afeni made the decision. She told them to turn off the machines, to let him go, and she held his hand as he took his last breath. And in that moment, the woman who'd survived a trial while pregnant, who'd beaten addiction, who'd raised a revolutionary, that woman broke. Because some pain is too big to survive whole, and losing your child is the kind of pain that cracks you open and never fully heals. There's no manual for this, no blueprint for how to be strong when the thing you love most in the world is gone. You just endure, or you don't. After Tupac's death, Afeni had to make another decision: what to do with his legacy. Death Row Records owned the masters to the albums Tupac had recorded under contract. They owned his unreleased music, and Suge Knight was already talking about posthumous releases, about capitalizing on Tupac's death. And Afeni knew that if she didn't fight, Suge would control her son's voice forever, turn him into a product, strip away the revolutionary message, and sell the image. So she fought, she hired lawyers, she went to court, and she battled death row records for years to get control of Tupac's estate. It was exhausting, painful. Every legal brief felt like reopening the wound. But Afeni won. By the early 2000s, she'd regained control of Tupac's unreleased music. She founded Amaru Entertainment to manage his legacy, and she made sure that the posthumous albums, the films, the documentaries, the tributes, honored who Tupac really was. Not just the thug, not just the martyr, but the poet, the revolutionary, the boy she'd raised to fight for justice. And she protected that legacy until the day she died. Some battles you fight because you have to, and some battles you fight because if you don't, everything you've already lost will have been for nothing. Afeni Shakur lived for 20 years after Tupac's death, and those 20 years were defined by two things: preserving her son's legacy and trying to process a grief that never fully went away. She gave interviews, she spoke at events, she managed the estate, she sued people who tried to exploit Tupac's image, and she did it all while carrying a weight that most people can't imagine. Because Afeni didn't just lose her son, she lost the person who made all her suffering mean something. The person who proved that even when the system tries to destroy you, you can rise, you can create, you can change the world. And without Tupac, Afeni had to find a new reason to keep going. And she did. She found it in the work, in protecting his name, in making sure that 25-year-old boy from Baltimore, who became a voice for millions, didn't get reduced to a cautionary tale or a gangster stereotype. She made sure people remembered the poet, the revolutionary, the son of a Black Panther who carried his mother's fight into the next generation. In interviews, Afeni was remarkably open about her pain. She didn't hide behind strength or stoicism. She talked about the nightmares, the days when she couldn't get out of bed, the guilt over decisions she'd made or hadn't made, the what-ifs that haunted her. What if I'd been a better mother? What if I'd kept him away from death row? What if I'd been there that night in Las Vegas? Those questions didn't have answers, but they lived in her anyway, and she learned to carry them, not gracefully, not easily, but honestly. She said in one interview that grief doesn't make you noble, it just makes you tired. And some days, the tiredness is so overwhelming that all you can do is survive until tomorrow, and then you do it again. For 20 years, Afeni did that. She survived, and she turned her survival into purpose, into protection, into a promise that Tupac's death wouldn't be in vain. She also became an advocate for criminal justice reform, for addiction recovery programs, for young black men who were being funneled into the same prison system that had tried to destroy her and her son. She used Tupac's name, his platform, his influence, to fight for the things he'd cared about. And in doing so, she kept him alive, not physically, but in spirit, in impact, in the policies that changed because she refused to let his death be just another statistic. Afeni understood something profound. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you keep building, even after the person is gone. And she built, every single day, until she couldn't anymore. You don't heal from losing a child. You just find ways to live with the absence. And sometimes, living with it is the most revolutionary act of all. On May 20th, 2016, Afeni Shakur suffered a heart attack at her home in California. She was 69 years old. She was rushed to the hospital, but she didn't survive. And when the news broke, the tributes poured in from fans, from activists, from people whose lives Tupac's music had touched. But beneath the tributes was a sadder truth. Afeni had died still fighting, still managing the estate, still protecting Tupac's name from people who wanted to profit without understanding. She never got to rest, never got to step away and say, "I've done enough." Because when you lose your child, there's no such thing as enough. You just keep going until you can't. And Afeni went until her heart gave out. There's a moment in a 2003 documentary where Afeni is asked what she wants people to know about Tupac. And she pauses for a long time. And then she says, he wasn't perfect, he made mistakes, he hurt people, but he tried. Every single day, he tried to be better than the world told him he could be. And that's all I ever asked of him, to try. And then she cries. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears. The kind that come when you've carried something heavy for so long that even talking about it breaks the dam. And in that moment, you see the full weight of what Afeni lived with. The pride, the grief, the love, the knowledge that her son changed the world, and it still wasn't enough to save him, that she raised a revolutionary and the world killed him for it. And there's no justice in that. No closure, just the endless ache of absence. People who knew Afeni in her final years said she never really recovered. She functioned, she worked, she showed up, but there was a sadness that never left her eyes, a tiredness that no amount of sleep could fix. She'd survived the FBI, she'd survived addiction, she'd survived poverty and prison, and a trial that should have destroyed her, but she couldn't survive losing Tupac. Not really, she just learned to live with the wound. And sometimes, living with the wound is all you can do. You wake up, you breathe, you keep moving, not because you're healed, but because you're still here. And as long as you're here, you honor the person who's gone by, refusing to let them be forgotten. Afeni Shakur's legacy is complicated. She was a revolutionary, a survivor, a mother, an addict, a fighter. She was all of those things at once, and she refused to let anyone simplify her into a neat narrative. Just like she refused to let anyone simplify Tupac. She understood that people are messy, that heroes have flaws, that strength and vulnerability coexist, and she taught Tupac that, gave him permission to be fully human in his art, to rap about pain and power in the same song, to love his mother and resent her in the same breath, to be a revolutionary and a contradiction. And that's why Tupac's music still resonates, because it's honest, complicated, real, and that honesty came from Afeni, from the woman who fought the US government while pregnant and won, who battled addiction and survived, who lost her son and kept his voice alive for 20 more years, who proved that legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die, it's what you build every day you're alive, even when it hurts, even when you're broken, even when survival is the most you can manage. You keep building, and Afeni built until her heart stopped. The measure of a life isn't how long you live, it's what you protect, what you fight for, what you refuse to let die. There's a question people often ask about Afeni. Did she blame herself for Tupac's death? And the answer is complicated, because blame isn't binary. Afeni knew she didn't pull the trigger, didn't put Tupac in that car, didn't make him sign with death row. But she also knew that every choice she'd made, raising him to be a fighter, teaching him to challenge authority, giving him a revolutionary's name, set him on a path that made him a target, and she lived with that. The knowledge that the very things that made Tupac powerful also made him vulnerable, that you can't raise someone to fight the system without accepting that the system will fight back. And sometimes the system wins, not because it's right, but because it's bigger, stronger, more ruthless, and there's no preparing for that. No way to protect your child from a machine designed to destroy them. But here's the other truth. If Afeni had raised Tupac differently, if she'd taught him to be quiet, to assimilate, to accept his place in a system designed to oppress him, he wouldn't have been Tupac. He would have been someone else, someone safer, someone less complicated, but someone without the voice that changed millions of lives, someone without the art that still resonates nearly 30 years after his death. And Afeni understood that. She'd rather have raised a revolutionary who died young than a quiet man who lived long but meant nothing, because revolutions require sacrifice, and sometimes the sacrifice is unbearable, but it's still necessary. Afeni Shakur died on May 2, 2016. She was buried beside her son, or rather, beside the memorial they'd created, since Tupac's ashes had been scattered years earlier. And when people talked about her after she was gone, they talked about strength, about resilience, about the mother who raised a legend. But the truth is more complicated. Afeni was strong, but she was also broken. She survived, but she never healed. She protected Tupac's legacy for 20 years, but she also carried the guilt, the grief, and the questions that had no answers. And maybe that's the real story, not the triumph, but the endurance. The refusal to give up even when giving up would have been easier. The decision to keep building even when the foundation is shattered. The love that persists beyond death, beyond logic, beyond any hope of resolution. Tupac once said in an interview that everything he was, he owed to his mother, that she gave him the fire, the politics, the refusal to accept the world as it was. And he was right. Afeni didn't just raise Tupac, she made him, shaped him, gave him the tools to become a voice for a generation. And then she watched the world take him, and she survived that. Not beautifully, not without scars, but she survived. And she spent the rest of her life making sure that the boy she raised, the revolutionary, the poet, the fighter, would never be forgotten. And he hasn't been, because of her. Because Afeni Shakur refused to let her son's death be the end of his story. She made it the beginning of his legacy. And she protected that legacy with everything she had until the day her heart stopped. Some mothers give their children life. Afeni gave hers a revolution. And then she gave the world permission to remember him as more than the way he died. On September 13, 1996, Afeni Shakur held her son's hand and let him go. She was 49 years old, and the boy she'd carried in her womb while on trial for her life, the boy she'd named after a revolutionary, raised to fight and loved with a fierceness that reshaped both their lives, was gone. She lived for 20 more years, and in those 20 years, she did what revolutionaries do. She kept fighting for justice, for legacy, for the truth. She made sure Tupac wasn't reduced to a statistic or a stereotype. She protected his art, his message, his humanity. And when she died in 2016, she left behind proof that a mother's love doesn't end when her child dies. It just transforms into purpose, into protection, into a promise that as long as she's alive, they'll never be forgotten. Afeni Shakur wasn't perfect. She struggled, she failed, she carried guilt and grief that never fully left her. But she was also a warrior, a survivor, a mother who gave everything to raise a son who changed the world. And that's her legacy. Not just Tupac, but the fight, the refusal to break even when breaking would have been easier, the love that persists beyond death, the revolution that continues even after the revolutionary is gone. Afeni taught Tupac to fight, and when he was gone, she kept fighting for him until her heart gave out, until she'd done everything she could. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Fight for the people we love, protect what matters, and refuse to let the world forget the ones who changed it. The revolution doesn't end when the revolutionary dies. It continues in the people who loved them. And Afeni Shakur proved that every single day until she couldn't anymore. What's the strongest lesson your mother taught you? The one that still shapes who you are today? Drop it below. Let's honor the women who made us.